So, after 4 million years, Deltarune Chapters 3 and 4 have released. There's a lot to talk about in this game, from mysteries to mini-games to some weird theories, but I'm going to be focusing on one thing today: the characters. Like most great stories, Deltarune's heart lies in its characters, and so in this video, I'm going to go over each one and follow the character arcs and motivations so far in the series. This video will spoil up to the end of Chapter 4, and it is intended for people who have played all of Deltarune and Undertale. Also, be sure to subscribe for more video essays and character analyses like this. Let's begin. So let's start off by talking about the character who is the heart of Deltarune, Susie, a character who, over the course of the story, goes from an annoyance to someone who is basically the main character of Deltarune. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. When you first meet her, Susie introduces herself by eating Chris and slamming chalk into a locker. Wait, that's not right. While she sort of seems to be the classic bully character, her antics don't seem to make her too popular with all of her classmates hating her guts. So Susie just picks on the only one lower on the totem pole: the very quiet and kinda weird Chris. Well, we later learn out that Chris actually was pretty good at dealing with Susie in the past, but now that the player has control of them, they're a little pathetic and kinda just stare at them, but I'll get to that later. However, after we end up in the Dark World, Susie changes, and by that I mean she changes sides. One of my favorite parts of Chapter 1 is how Susie defects to join Lancer's side, and really, I can't blame her. Lancer is the coolest being alive. Susie has always been told what to do by others. We see it in school, she's constantly lectured by teachers who just can't understand her or really work with her. They just tell her what to do and then punish her whenever she pushes back. Susie is constantly fighting back against her destiny throughout Deltarune. So she also pushes back when Ralsei tries to boss her into being a hero. Of course, at this point, being a villain isn't too serious of a thing, with Susie and Lancer generally just goofing around and getting in the way of the heroes. And it is fun that Susie makes fast friends with Lancer. It shows that whenever she breaks down her walls a bit, she's able to make genuine connections with others pretty quickly. And after Lancer and her join the rest of the heroes and face King, she also shows some real concern for Lancer. Even after he tries to trap them in the basement, she promises to try to talk with King instead of fighting, in order to save Lancer from losing his friends and dad. And then to end off the first chapter, it all comes full circle, with King repeating what Susie said earlier to Chris: "Quiet people piss me off." But this time, instead of saying it, Susie protects Chris. And she kinda spells out her character arc for this chapter right here: if you never let your guard down, then you'll hurt people you like. From this point on, Susie develops a pretty close relationship with Chris, or at least the player-controlled Chris, as she doesn't really interact with normal Chris. And this relationship is easily one of my favorite parts of the game. The two are absolute menaces and spend almost all the time in the game together. Susie later admits that she regrets not making friends with Chris before this, and she seems to actually regret how she used to act, so we're already seeing her growing. And also, it turns out that before all this happened, Toriel and Susie have actually met, with Toriel comforting Susie and being one of the few adults who has actually been able to help her. Toriel was someone who was willing to just sit down and listen to Susie. She was someone who was genuinely kind to her, and so Toriel was able to plant a seed of hope in Susie that she would be actually able to make friends. And ultimately, Susie is someone who clearly has a poor home life and has had a lot of bad experiences with other people. But now that she's finally surrounded by kind people who not only want the best for her, but are also willing to actually listen to her and be attentive to the sort of support she actually needs, she is able to flourish. And by the way, I'm just going to save Susie's relationship with Noelle for Noelle's section of this video, just so I'm not repeating myself. But later, in Chapter 3, Susie is once again really excited and happy to go on an adventure in a dark world with her new friends. She's really taken to her present situation and friends now that her life is much brighter. However, despite the bright presence, she's also acutely aware that things won't stay this way forever. She tries to invite Ralsei out into the real world, and bring him to a festival with Chris and her, but he obviously can't come, as he's a Darkner. He tries to tell Susie that she shouldn't feel bad for him, as he's not real. He's just an object who exists to serve Lightners. And though Susie understands the Dark Worlds are kinda fake, I mean, it all seemed too good to be true in the first place, she doesn't care. Ralsei seems real, their adventures seem real, it all means stuff to her, so they must matter. They must be real in some way. And this continues her theme of how she refuses to give up and accept what others say. She knows that in some way, she's right, and so she won't let what Ralsei says about the Dark World change how she feels and acts. She's going to make what she wants to happen, no matter what. In Chapter 4, a really important character in Susie's overall arc is introduced: Old Man Gerson. Old Man Gerson is dead. However, he happens to be the most useful party member in the entire chapter. That's how goated he is. Before now, Susie has been worrying about her role in the group. She wants to contribute to them by providing healing, but she doesn't have much talent for it, and Rousey already perfectly fills that role. Despite this, she has begun to learn healing, but is now starting to rethink it. And this also lines up with her happening to learn about Chris's skill with the piano, which is another skill that Susie is very impressed by and that she also clearly has some interest in pursuing, but also one where she's very far behind and she doesn't like losing. And honestly, this is super relatable. Whenever you're starting something new or picking up an old skill again, it can be very tempting to drop it as soon as you run into difficulties, or if you start comparing yourself to others. But Old Man Gerson encourages Susie to keep at it and to dedicate herself to learning the heal, all in his goofy, clever way. He's another fantastic influence over Susie and the first who she feels she's really learning from. And this goes even further in the secret boss fight with him, where he pushes Susie to actually use her healing skills in a difficult fight. So whenever they exit the Dark World and she realizes that he's already been dead, it's quite the shock. And in the conclusion of Chapter 4, we get to see a bit more of the negative side of her ruthless fight against fate. She wants every day to be the same as yesterday. She understands that this is a fantasy, but she wants to keep going on fun adventures with her friend group and never have anything change ever. This is obviously understandable. She's faced with so much uncertainty in the future and she has had such a bad past, but she can't help but hope for the current present to continue forever, for her to keep dreaming forever. So I think it'll be interesting whenever it's clear that this can't happen. We've already begun to see the status quo shift with chapters 3 and 4, but when it really breaks, I think how Susie handles it will be the core of the story. I think this dream is also reflected in the hidden boss, Old Man Gerson, Hammer of Justice form. As after you defeat him, he asks Susie what the end to his book series should be, and she responds that it shouldn't end, and the characters of the story should keep on adventuring together forever. But once again, soon after this, Susie learns that Gerson has already passed, and while she initially attempts to talk with him again, she ultimately is able to accept his death, and she writes out his last wish for his son. Because of this event, I believe that whenever the time comes, Susie will be able to deal with the changes and consequences that must come about in order to save the world, but it won't be easy. Throughout it all, whenever Susie runs into adults and classmates who put her into a box, whenever she faces the self-defeating beliefs of Rousey, when she has to contend with a prophecy that brought them all together ending in tragedy, she has decided no. She's gonna do it her own way, and she'll break through fate. Rousey is a lonely prince. He has seemingly been along for a very long time, and he's been waiting for you. Well, waiting for Susie, and Chris's player-controlled soul. Either way, Rousey is a super kind, super giving guy who consistently does everything he can for his friends. To a fault. Yeah, the main thing that Rousey suffers with is how he completely ignores his own needs. He constantly bakes cakes for others, but he has never even tried one himself. He has created all sorts of rooms in his castle for all of his friends, but he didn't even consider making a real one for himself, despite living here all his life. And that's because Rousey is a Darkener, and he believes that he's only a tool to be helpful to the Lighteners. It seems that his whole life, he's been drilled on the prophecy and the rules of the Dark Worlds. And I don't know who or what is doing this drilling, but it imparted the belief on Rousey that he doesn't matter outside of his ability to help others and play his part. Luckily, as the game goes on, the other characters, especially Susie, let him know how stupid and self-destructive this belief is. And slowly, Rousey starts to care more for himself. He didn't even really have a personality before now, as he simply always did what he thought other people needed and wanted. He didn't care about baking or healing magic, but he wanted to help others, and he thought they would need it. And while helping others isn't interest in itself, he also realizes that maybe he should be doing some things because he enjoys them. Maybe he should try being just a little bit more selfish for once. One of my favorite, kind of subtle moments is how Rousey always wants to pose whenever the three of them group up. And he directly requests this later on in the chapters. It's a tiny thing, but now he's finally willing to impose just a bit on other people for this tiny thing because he likes doing it, and that's great. Throughout chapter 1, Rousey also goes through a smaller character arc, as he learns that the ideals that he was taught aren't always correct. His beliefs that everything can be solved by talking result in him being taken advantage of by the king, who uses his forgiveness to almost kill the three of them. So Rousey learns a bit from Susie. Sometimes you have to fight truly evil people. I think this is also sort of a metatextual bit. As in Undertale, you're able to go through the entire game sparing everyone, and it can honestly be a bit preachy with how it punishes any fighting, even if Frisk is constantly being attacked by monsters. In Deltarune, things are similar, but not the exact same. The old morality system was a bit overbearing, and in Deltarune you have to choose when to fight and when to act, and often you have to do both. But back to Rousey. One of his main worries throughout chapter 3 is about Suzy. He knows that she didn't really have any friends before meeting them, and he wants to be able to be with her outside of the Dark Worlds, but he can't, and that worries him. He feels this constant responsibility of making sure she is happy, and he hopes that Chris can do that in his place. Ultimately, he just has to trust that he's not the only person who cares for Suzy. She now has many people who will look out for her when Rousey can't, and he needs to be comfortable with this new reality. Another interesting detail that I noticed is that Rousey pretty much always interprets Chris's statements as positively as possible, even whenever the player chooses for them to do some genuinely mean things. Maybe he is just kinda dumb, but I think that he's sort of consciously choosing to see Chris in the best light possible. After all, Chris is the hero, so they have to be nice, right? One moment that really made me suspicious of Rousey early on was whenever he finally revealed the true danger of the Dark Fountains and the Roaring and Titans in Chapter 2. For some reason, he never felt it was necessary to explain this in depth to the group before, and he only does it at the last possible second to stop Birdley from dooming them all. Rousey is by far the most educated character on the nature of the world in the group of heroes, and he likely knows more about all this than everybody but the Knight themselves, but he chooses to keep this all to himself, and this and other things really made me and others get pretty suspicious of him. However, in Chapter 4, we get the real reason he was hiding all this. If someone is going to hurt, it might as well be me. Rousey has been burdened with knowledge. He not only knows the danger that they're all in, but he also knows that something terrible is prophesied to happen. This information is overwhelming for him. He's never sure when to share it with others and when to hide it, and he really wants to shield his friends from pain. So he made the executive decision to keep everyone else in the dark, which, while it comes from a place of kindness, I think it was absolutely the wrong choice, and it only continues to come back to hurt everyone again and again. He is practically babying his friends, keeping them ignorant of the real danger that everybody is in, out of this self-destructive wish to be the one who bears all the pain. But while it may sound harsh, it does all make sense. It tracks with his characters. It is a painfully human, well, monster darkener thing to do something like this, and he's getting better as the story goes on. With support from Suzy, Rousey promises to stop keeping secrets, save for the end of the full prophecy. Rousey has been defined by a fate given to him from the beginning of his life, but maybe, with help from Suzy and others, he can break through that phase. But so what is Rousey anyways? Sure, he's a darkener, but he also looks and acts like Azrael, so how does that work? Well, we don't really know, but I kinda think that he's not really a physical object in the light world. That would help explain why he's able to go to any dark world. I think he's a more mercurial thing. Something that was created either by the religion in Deltarune, or maybe what the religion was based on. I mean, the religion covers a prophecy that Rousey has fully memorized and is involved with. He also perfectly fits with a core tenet of the religion: just be nice to everyone. And he shares all the problems that a simplistic philosophy like that has. As for his relationship with Azrael, well, it seems the Dark Worlds reflect their creators in some ways. Perhaps the first fountain that manifested Rousey was created by Chris, and so they projected the being who they most associated with a perfectly kind and selfless figure like Rousey, which just so happened to be their older brother, Azrael. So yeah, I don't think that Rousey is an object, nor do I think he's Azrael. I think he's a bit of a combination of Chris's perception of Azrael and maybe something related to the religion of Deltarune. Whatever it is called. Maybe the religion is just called Deltarune. I don't think we ever actually hear his name. Rousey really is the odd one out of the group, given that he's a darkener and we don't really know that much about him. It's understandable that a lot of the early theories for Deltarune were about him being evil or hiding something, as his incredibly chipper but suspicious attitude invited suspicion. However, we have learned that his reasons for acting this way are a bit less evil and a bit more sad. Rousey truly is a lonely prince. Even now that he has friends, he still hasn't been able to treat himself like a person, instead seeing himself as an object who only exists to serve. But hopefully, throughout the rest of the chapters, we can see him continue his journey of self-actualization. Noelle is my second favorite character, right below Suzy. Noelle is kind and soft-spoken. We consistently see her being ignored and talked over because of her quiet nature, and she also has trouble talking to people. Well, outside of Chris. Noelle is actually who we get a lot of the info about how Chris used to act before the player took over them. As Noelle was a childhood friend of Chris. Chris was constantly playing pranks on Noelle, such as hiding under her bed, shaking Ferris wheels, and the like. But she's noticed a big change in Chris lately, which is obviously due to the player controlling Chris, but I'll get to that later. Either way, the relationship with Chris seems to be less close than it once was. I think this is likely due to the disappearance of Des. We still have very few details to base it on, but Des is gone, and it seems like this marked a big change in the lives of the Dreamers in the holidays. And so whenever the story begins, while they're still friendly, Chris and Noelle aren't nearly as close as they used to be. Whenever Noelle is sucked into the second Dark World, she's initially stuck as a very willing peon of Queen. But after she gets out of that great deal, she joins the party and is very subtle about her interest in Susie. And over the next period in the Dark World is where this goes from obvious to even more obvious that the two have a thing. Susie and Noelle are very, very awkward around each other. However, ever since they first met, Susie has liked Noelle, ever since Noelle gave her a pencil, which she ate, and treated her kindly. Susie has harbored a crush on her, but Noelle didn't even know if Susie had ever noticed her before the Dark World. But while they're together in the Dark World, they get to talk more, and eventually ride on a Ferris wheel together. Noelle admits that she likes scary things like horror movies, so long as she knows that she's safe and can be comforted. Her father likes to claim that she's so fragile and easily scared that just about anything could kill her, but she is shown to be very resilient so long as she's given support by others. Susie is scary, but she's also surprisingly kind and supportive of others, so it makes sense that Noelle would be into her. Noelle also states that she wishes she could be more like Susie, be able to ignore social rules and do what she wants with courage, probably not realizing that Susie suffers from being treated like an outcast. She just doesn't let people outside of Chris and Toriel know about that. Later on in chapter 4, we get a lot more interaction between Noelle and Susie. They bond over their shared love of scary movies. They talk about the dream with the Ferris wheel and Susie's non-existent tail. And to top it off, Susie asks her out to the festival on the next day. So yeah, this relationship transferred pretty well from the dream to reality. Despite Noelle's usually shy and reserved demeanor, as the story goes on and Noelle spends more time with Susie, she begins to express herself more. She chokes Birdley out. It's mostly played for jokes, but Noelle clearly has a lot of bottled up frustration towards Birdley, and I can't blame her. Birdley clings onto Noelle as he really got addicted to feeling smart, and the only way he is able to maintain his #1 spot in the class is with the help of Noelle. At least that's what he believes. So he sticks with her and is also constantly making clues advances towards her. Now, it did kind of seem like we were getting some character progression with him at the end of chapter 2, but that seemingly got reset in chapter 4, and he's right back to asking her out to the festival. This is kind of annoying, but well, being annoying is his main character trait. But besides the assault, the more positive way that we see that Noelle is beginning to grow a spine is how she stands up against Queen. Throughout the whole chapter, Queen is sort of doing what she thinks Noelle wants, based on assumptions that she made of Noelle, being a computer and all. But Noelle, tired of having these assumptions thrust upon her, finally tells Queen off. And finally, as of chapter 4, we get to see a bit more of Noelle. And I've already talked a bunch about her conversations with Susie throughout this section, which is a highlight of Deltarune as a whole for me. But the one thing that I kept thinking is she stupid? I mean, Susie is absolutely terrible at lying and she slips up like 10 times. But Noelle seemingly continues to believe that it was all a dream. Honestly, this is probably on purpose from her. It's just showing that Noelle is continuing to avoid the elephant in the room. Well, the second elephant, the one sitting right next to her and Susie's relationship. But for now, she's just avoiding the problem until she absolutely has to face it. All in all, Noelle is a fascinating character. And she's also one who is engulfed in secrets and half-finished character arcs. So there's a lot to talk about with her, despite her really only playing a major role in one Dark World in the start of chapter 4, plus her being featured in the little ARG that they did in between chapters 2 and 3 and 4. But I have the feeling that she'll only become more and more important as the game goes on. Fingers crossed that she'll become a permanent party member. Oh yeah, and there's a Snowbrave route. Yeah. While Noelle may be engulfed in secrets, Chris is engulfed in way more secrets. I'm still not all that sure about what's going on with them, but I'll try my best. Chris is the adopted child of Toriel and their soon-to-be father-in-law, Sans. And throughout the game, they appear to be just as blank a slate as Frisk, just a player insert who you can make as mean, kind, or flirtatious as you want. Yeah, you already know this isn't the full truth. No one can choose who they are in this world, and Chris has a whole personality, backstory, and motivations separate from the player. Chris is a prankster. They're quiet and speak in a monotone mumble, and this led to Susie harassing them and them not really having any friends at school outside of Noelle. But Chris don't care no more, and they absolutely can't stand up for themselves. Despite this, Chris wasn't always this disconnected from everyone. Back before Azriel went to college, it is clear that they were incredibly close with their brother and with the Holiday family before Des went missing. But now that Azriel is left, it seems that Chris has really isolated themselves. Another important character trait is that Chris clearly practiced piano, as you can see in this literally 6-minute long clip where they just play a melody of all sorts of songs, which is an Easter egg that happens in chapter 4. But once the player takes control, Chris suddenly loses that skill, highlighting a stark difference between Chris and the player. And this leads me into the big thing going on with Chris. We, the player, are puppeteering their body. Noelle also notices their change in behavior lately, with Chris's speech seeming robotic, like it was coming from a speaker. Or maybe like it was a pre-written response chosen in the RPG menu by a person from a different reality. Or something like that. Also, I doubt that normal Chris was a flirt like the player can be. Toriel also comments on how Chris has been looking a little sick lately. I wonder if the player controlling Chris is damaging their health, and that's why Chris is barely able to function without the soul. And all these health problems could also be explained by the fact that Chris's diet now seems to consist entirely of moss. But it's also not totally clear how much Chris is against the player controlling them. When we see them in conversation with the voice on the phone, it's clear that they need the soul in the dark world, and so it's likely that they are usually unhappily letting the player control them so that they can participate in dark worlds and not limp around and weird everyone out. But sometimes this annoyance seems to cross into real disdain for the player, depending on our actions. For example, whenever the player chooses dialogue options that Chris dislikes, Chris may fight against their body and the dialogue comes out as strained. And Chris also stops the player from prying into their personal life and their plotting with the phone person, closing their eyes to hide Asriel's search history and wiping their phone's contracts. But whenever the player chooses to pursue the Snowgrave route, this goes from a mildly disturbing situation to a full-on horror show. Chris does not want to allow the player to do what they are doing, but they are forced to watch in horror as a player manipulates Noelle into killing Birdley and countless Darkners. Finally, Chris seems to have several unique skills. Obviously, they lead the group of heroes, but more interestingly, they seem to have the ability to hear the thoughts of other people, indicated by these parentheses. This leads to a lot of jokes, some insightful character moments, and also the most creepy scene in the game, where the player uses this ability to read Noelle's mind over and over as they manipulate her into putting the thorn ring back on. They are also able to close their eyes and picture other things that are happening across the dark world. I bet these are both powers of the soul, however, not Chris, with the second one being similar to whenever you move the soul around in the real world to spy on people. Chris is an enigma. They aren't a blank slate, but it's still difficult to see what's really on that slate. It does seem that they are working with a knight and or Carol, as they call them on the phone. I'll be talking more about the knight later, but honestly, I'm not totally sure what to think of Chris's involvement with them. I'd like to think that Chris has good intentions, and my guess is that they're trying to bring the Dreamers and Holiday families back together and find deaths through the power of dark worlds or something, but I guess we'll see. Now that I've covered the core 4 characters, I'm going to go through all the chapters, their antagonists, their secrets, their gameplay, and talk about all that. Sound cool? Cool. So, Chapter 1. It's been forever since this came out, but it's still pretty great. Lancer is a fantastic comedic relief character who I hope continues to show up in every chapter, and this chapter also does a lot of really interesting stuff with the gameplay format which Undertale started. Early on, you have to actually stop Susie from attacking monsters in order to play in a pacifist mode, and even if you do fight, which you sometimes have to do, it isn't as cut and dry. Fighting won't put you on the genocide route, it'll just change a few things, and in general, the updated axe system, tension, defending, and all that stuff are great additions to the battle system. Chapter 1 lays out the format for future chapters to follow and to break, and it does a great job at that. So let's touch on our first hidden boss, Jevil. All these bosses are connected and each rewards you with a shadow crystal. It seems that they all receive shadow crystals, with Jevil being given it by a mysterious figure. And after receiving this crystal, Jevil goes mad and is locked up in a cell. But he believes that he's the only one who's really free, and he wants others to join him in the cell and be free with him. He seems to think that the whole world is a big game. And, I mean, he's right. It seems that the shadow crystals have the ability to see through the dark worlds and into the light world, which likely made Jevil realize his reality was fiction, and he went insane. It's also possible that he realized that not only was his dark world fake, but also that the light world was all just part of a video game as well, which is very meta and also would probably make you even more insane. Chapter 2 is probably still my favorite. It helps that it came out at the perfect time, but its combination of humor, how it flushes out Noelle and Birdley, the Snowgrave route, and most of all, Queen, makes it hard to beat in my opinion. And honestly, this is usually the section of stories I like the most. The part after the start where everything is in place and the story can really get rolling. My favorite Hunter x Hunter arcs are Heaven's Arena and Yorknew, Snowdin is my favorite part of Undertale, and this is my favorite part, so far, of Deltarune. But anyways, Queen. Though she sometimes gets overshadowed by a big shot, she is, in my opinion, by far the funniest Deltarune or Undertale character. Toby Fox is a master of writing dialogue in a weird and distinct way for each characters, and the voice sounds, typing quirks, and font choices also all add to this. Queen is a villain. Sort of, I guess. Like, she's always talking about taking over the world, but she is also trying to protect Noelle, and she thinks she's doing what everyone wants based on her surface level approximations of their needs. And whenever they tell her that no, they don't want that, she backs off really quickly. Plus, she had literally no idea that everyone would die if the night gets their way, so she shapes up after Rousey tells her off. With other characters, I feel like it could be a cop-out to make all their villainous deeds just misunderstandings, but with Queen, it fits right into her chaotic aura. But Spanson was the real breakout star of Chapter 2, this weird little glitchy spam email guy. His speech pattern is the craziest yet, and his song is a purely insane mashup of like a billion leitmotifs and voice clips. Spamton used to be a regular but unsuccessful spam email, and he used to talk in a more normal way, if the Addisons who are quoting him are to be believed. But at some point he started talking with someone on the phone, who was able to transform him into a huge success overnight. But he's eventually abandoned by the phone guy who made him a big shot, and everything starts falling apart from him. And this process is sped up by Spamton finding a dark crystal of his own and going absolutely insane. So when we finally meet him and help him set up his sick new body, he tries to steal our soul. He is literally a puppet in this new form, so he wants the soul, which he hopes will give him freedom. This is pretty ironic, as Chris is literally being puppeted by the soul which the player controls, but also reinforces their reoccurring theme of freedom with the hidden bosses. So who is this mysterious guy who keeps handing out crystals and apparently sells advice? And is it just one person, or is it multiple? Well, there are several candidates, but the guy giving Spamton advice could be Tina or Mike, but their phone is eventually taken over by whoever is making the garbage sounds on Chris's phone and other people's phone. So the crystal giver in this person on the phone is probably the Knight, although Gaster is somewhat of a candidate, given the themes of insanity and the sounds and some other hints of Gaster. Speaking of Gaster, one interesting fact about the shadow crystals is that whenever used in the real world, Chris can see right through their arm. This may be connected to one of the Goner NPCs from Undertale. If you didn't know, Goners are these strange black and white NPCs from Undertale who are associated with Gaster, who talks about a world where everything is exactly the same. And Goner Kid talks about a world where everything is exactly the same, except you don't exist. So perhaps these crystals show this world to the viewer whenever used in the light world. Oh, poor Tina. I kinda wish he was a full 90s CGI dude throughout the game, just to make him clash even more with the rest. But at least this version dances. This chapter is really weird gameplay wise, as it's basically two big Zelda games, a collection of other mini games, and then their final fight. And honestly, I don't love the Zelda dungeon stuff, but everything else is great, especially Tina. Tina is a big TB guy. He's silly and he's sad that nobody really watches him anymore. Throughout the chapter, he acts incredibly suspicious, as he's been working with the Knights, who promised that he would have a huge audience so long as he was able to trap the three heroes in an endless TV show long enough for the Knight to do what they want to do. But when Susie promises to find him a new home where people will actually watch him, he chills out, and he frees Toriel and the group, before getting stabbed. Tina is always talking about a guy named Mike, his best friend and showrunner who is very cool, and who also might not exist. Whenever you finally find Mike in Chapter 4, it turns out it's not Mike. It's just a bunch of imposters who are trying to keep Tina happy. It's unclear if Mike was ever a real guy. He might have just been a figment of Tina's imagination. But Spamton also references the guy, so maybe he is real and we haven't met him yet. Of course, Spamton isn't a great source, but whatever. One other thing that I want to mention about Chapter 3 that I haven't seen any discussion about online is this little talk from Shudda near the end of the chapter. They mentioned that before the place was turned into a theater, TV land used to be a vast wilderness. Whenever Tina showed up, those who didn't sign his paper and become part of the show were sent off to the far lands, a place that only someone referred to as the legend old hermit knows how to get to. Now it seems that this just describes the TV being set up in the living room and whatever was there before being moved elsewhere. But I think the mention of a legend old hermit is really interesting because I'm not really sure who and what this could be. Maybe this is foreshadowing another part of Chris's house becoming a dark fountain, as the Farlands could be their room, or another room in the house. I really don't know about the legend old hermit, especially as it says legend instead of legendary, which is probably just Shudda talking weird, but I'm really interested to hear if anyone has any idea what this means in the comments, as it's really stood out to me. But I haven't found a single mention of it online, to the point where I had to go download a save file to go back to this point in the game and capture footage, as I couldn't find it on YouTube. And the ending of Chapter 3 is awesome, finally meeting the Knight, which confirms that Chris isn't a Knight, even if they are working with the Knight, and also revealing a sort of hidden boss fight that might just be the hardest in Deltarune and Undertale. I've been trying to beat it for a while, but I still haven't done it myself. I do wonder what the Knight wanted with Toriel. Perhaps they originally wanted to use her as a prisoner to lure the team to the bunker, and just settled in Undyne later. Or perhaps they really need another person down at the bunker. Finally, Chapter 4. Chapter 3 was cool, but light on lore, so I'm glad we got a real change up here. And the most notable aspect of this chapter is the prophecy, and I mean that is its name. The prophecy expands on the lore of the game a lot. It also has a lot of very specific details, like mentioning that Lancer will say toothpaste and then boy. It also mentions that Chris is a cage with human soul and parts, which is a really interesting way to describe them. Rather than a puppet controlled by the player, they are a cage for the player, implying that they are keeping the soul from escaping themselves, which does kind of make sense, as they literally lock up the soul in a cage or box whenever they want to be away from it. A few other interesting lines are the Flower Man trapped in asylum, which likely refers to Asgore being somehow trapped, possibly by his dark shard. Also worth mentioning is another hidden section of the prophecy. The angel banished will finally meet with his desire. And according to Rouse, below it has a picture of what the angel really looks like, although it is obscured by a wall in the game. I wonder what this line means. It's theorized that the angel could be the player, like it is in Undertale, in which case our true desire could be finishing the game or something. But the angel could also be Noelle, as both Spanton and the Addisons call her Angel. If so, her true desire could be finally getting with Susie or finding Des or something. However, if it is Noelle, this picture of her must be really weird, otherwise Susie would recognize her in it. However, there are also two sections in the prophecy that are destroyed before we can see them. First is one that is destroyed by Gerson. I don't know if this one is important or why he destroyed it, but it comes right after the talk of the night, so it probably is. And then there's a penultimate line, the one that Rouse is trying so hard to obscure. This line is also seen and then destroyed by Susie. It apparently describes a final tragedy, something that is predestined to happen when all hope is lost. And it seems to be some sort of sacrifice that the heroes will have to make in order to save the worlds. And I bet that this sacrifice has to do with either Rouse or Susie. If it was a direct sacrifice by Chris, I bet Susie would let them know. But instead, one of those other two are planning on making this heroic sacrifice. And they don't want Chris getting in the way of them doing that. I think it's interesting how little the Knight is mentioned in the prophecy, as well as how Chris working with the Knight isn't mentioned at all. I wonder if this is a clue that the prophecy isn't totally set in stone, as it does seem a bit weird that one of the heroes of the story is working with the villain, unless Chris is actually a double agent or something. Finally, the chapter ends big with a Titan fight, by far the most visually impressive thing in Deltarune so far, which is really saying something as chapter 2 and 3 had some really cool stuff. But chapter 4 is on another level. I also love the look of the messed up dark world that Susie made, and the climbing sections are really cinematic as well. The chapter ends with a slow walk home in the rain, while an absolutely fantastic rendition of It's Raining Somewhere plays. Of course, the most horrifying scene in Deltarune history happens here, with Sans revealing his truly horrifying intentions. And then after this, Susie promises not to let that happen, likely referring to whatever the prophecy foretold. Chris gets a call from Phone Guy reminding them of a promise they made, and the game ends. And so to finish up, some character-focused theories. I don't know about all the more meta, Gaster, Undertale crossover stuff. Seems neat, but I really just focus on what's going on with some of these background characters who might become more important soon. Asgore is divorced. Studies show he is actually the most divorced dad of all time, and he didn't even need a Cybertruck. But the mystery behind why him and Toriel broke up isn't clear. I mean, it's not like they absolutely needed a big event to justify them divorcing, but things really seem to be pointing towards something happening in the past. In chapter 4, the player can find Asgore talking to himself, and he hopes out loud that Toriel will finally see that he just wanted to protect everyone, hinting at Asgore doing something that tore the family apart, even if he thought he was doing it for their sake. This also reflects his action in Undertale, in which he took it upon himself to murder human children to free the monsters, which tore his family apart in order to free everyone. Asgore also seems to be in contact with a Knight, or at least Carol, and he's also in possession of a black shard, which seems to be connected to the Knight. Besides the divorce, Asgore is as big a gardener as ever, and he tends to be a bit too giving with his flowers. He gives away so many that he can't pay rent, and he has to clean the Holiday's house in order to keep from losing his shop. So he's still incredibly selfless, and I think this can also be seen reflected in Rouse, who is also selfless to an extreme extent. So I think it can obviously be inferred by the transitive property that Asriel also had a similar personality to the other two. Carol Holiday is a bit of an enigma throughout the game, and we only get to meet her face to face in chapter 4. She's the mayor of the town, an incredibly strict, efficient, and busy person. One thing that caught my eye was that there is absolutely no crime in Hometown, and is supposedly because of her, which makes me wonder if she's somehow using Dark Worlds to do this. She's in contact with Chris, and likely in contact with the Knight as well. She could even beat the Knight, although I kinda believe it isn't her for reasons I'll explain after this. Carol is exceptionally cold to Susie whenever she finds Susie at her house, and she's very protective of Dez's guitar in the scene. Overall, we still don't know that much about Carol, but I think it's pretty clear that the game is setting her up to be at least a partial villain. Carol also seems to only be interested in Chris for the player's soul, and she refers to Chris as you in all red, so she seems to have some meta-awareness of the player. Finally, Des. I've used the word enigma a lot, but here it is again. Des is the enigma. Her disappearance seems to have set up a lot of events in the past and present of the game, and she seems to be a core drive for Noelle and Carol's characters. Des and Azrael seem to have been close, and this is evidenced by Des having a drawing of a dragon likely made by Azrael, and an unopened ska record which she probably gifted her, as he's apparently really into religious ska. In an Easter egg in chapter 3, it's possible to enter a secret room by entering 1225, December 25th, into the gachapon, and in this room you can get something that is hard like lacquer and a hard dark triangle, which sure sounds a lot like a guitar pick. You then drop it, and you can't find it, kind of like how Des goes missing. You also can't find your hand, but I don't know what that means. So yeah, this is probably Des's guitar pick, but I don't know what purpose the pick will serve in the game. Maybe it's just some sort of foreshadowing with the hand stuff. Des also apparently promised to one day bring Noelle somewhere like the city in chapter 2. So I wonder if this is a hint that Des actually formed this particular dark world in order to finally send Noelle to a city like she promised. But I guess if she did that, then she'd be the knight. So who is the knight? I think there are just a few candidates. Carol, Des, Papyrus, Rudy, or a wild card like Gaster. I don't think it's Papyrus, as there's basically no proof, other than him just not showing up. As for Carol, I think the strongest evidence that she's not the knight are twofold. First, whenever the knight talks on the phone, it's strange and labored. But Carol is shown to talk normally to Chris on the phone on the Snowgrave ending and in person. And Chris likely knows if she's the knight or not, so why would she do the knight voice? The second and more important piece of information in my opinion is the knight needs to be at the location where they make the fountains. And I find it a bit hard to believe that Carol, the mayor of the town, can sneak into the school's extra classroom, the library's computer lab, and the church without being seen. But there are also problems with Des being the knight as well, as there's this unused script in the code that has been updated with each chapter. It 100% was never intended to actually be used and is just there for data miners, but it includes some interesting details. For the first 2 chapters of Deltarune, it had dialogue from someone who's trapped in a dark place and who hears scratching noises. Then, with the new chapters, it's revealed that they sometimes have a dream about walking into darkness and a door being slammed behind them, which is probably what trapped them in here. They've since lost track of time and missed the things that happened to them before in their life, like watching late night TV. They no longer have to eat or drink at all, and in the darkness, the only thing they ever hear are scratching noises. I think this is likely Des, with the scratching being the players going around through the code. Des is shown to have watched late night TV with the others in the chapter 3 flashback, so that's a definite connection. The only other person I think it could be is Azrael, but he's supposed to be off at college, so he does already have a good excuse for being missing. So this does make it a bit strange if the knight is Des, so she's probably not the knight, unless it's some sort of like split personality thing going on. So maybe it's Rudy? I didn't initially think of it, but I did find this thread on Reddit that I'll link to that was talking about how the knight might be Rudy. And maybe that's the explanation for why Rudy is so sick, as he's working with Carol, Chris, and others in order to find Des, who's trapped somewhere, possibly literally scattered across the game files. And this is why he's always sick and tired and never really seems to recover. It could just be a normal sickness. But also this kind of explains the labored breathing of the knight whenever you hear them over the phone. There's still the issue of him having to sneak around everywhere, but if he's doing it in the night form, I guess it might make a little bit more sense for him to go missing, as he's not under as much surveillance as someone who's like the mayor of the town would be. Overall, I think this is pretty decent evidence, and that's the theory I'm going to go with for now, but I'm not 100% and it could always be disproven. So to finish this all off, I'm just going to talk about Snowgrave a little bit. Well, overall there isn't that much to be said about it that hasn't already been said earlier by others, especially as 90% of it happened in chapter 2. But yeah, slowly seeing this revealed after chapter 2 came out was absolutely insane, and it really felt like an internet creepypasta come to life. I think it's really interesting how it's been built on since, with the Spamton sweepstakes, including an ARG that showed how Noelle has always had a knack for breaking games, specifically breaking them with eggs, which just keep coming up. And since she's in a game, now she's breaking it too, even if she doesn't want to. Undertale was a crazy meta game, so I fully expect Deltarune to go even further, especially in the Snowgrave route. In chapter 3 and 4 there haven't been huge impacts, but the player does threaten Noelle and manages to secure a date with her to the upcoming festival. So I bet the next chapter will be a big divergence again, so I'm excited to hopefully see that happen. But anyways, thanks for watching. I definitely got this video out pretty quickly, but I've had it in the works since before chapter 3 and 4 released, and I have been sorta thinking about it since I finished my Undertale video way back in 2021. I think it's been a while. I might release a shorter video covering chapter 5 whenever it comes out, but I'll probably just wait till everything is done and release a proper sequel to this video. Either way, be sure to subscribe for more video essays, and maybe check out my videos over 9 Souls and mouthwashing, or maybe my old videos over Amori and Undertale on my other channel. The playlist should be popping up now on the end screen. Okay, bye.